Teste, teste de áudio, um, dois, um, dois, testando. Olá, teste, teste de áudio, um, dois, testando o áudio, teste.
going to start as scheduled, and we are happy to have you here.
I'm happy
Good
to
to
be
see you.
here.
Good to
No
see you again.
problem. I have plenty of time.
Thank you. If you want to show something that you are talking about us, and if you have any, if you want to share by email, so if in the middle of the presentation we could have any problem, we can share from our point. It's up to you, okay?
Okay.
If you had something to like share, like in the I forgot the name of
Like a
the
PowerPoint? No.
like a okay, if you don't have it, it's fine. Okay.
No.
Hi, Professor Janelle. Just on behalf of the court, thank you for being here. I'm Gustavo.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
A little bit different, but so thanks so much.
It's my pleasure. Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
Hi, Professor. I think we could start if you're ready.
Sure, I'm ready when you are.
We are. Good morning, everyone. It's a great honor to open this webinar today. First and foremost, I would like to express our deepest gratitude to the Superior Court of Sports Justice. We are privileged to have the support of President Luiz Otávio Veríssimo Teixeira, whose leadership continues to strengthen the integrity of Brazilian football, and to Gustavo Wald. I would like to also to extend a special thank you to the National School of Sports Justice, represented here by its president, Mr. Luis Felipe Bulos. As a dean of the court, his commitment to legal education and excellency is the reason we can host high-level international dialogues like the one we are about to start. This event is also a proud outcome of the Visiting Research Fellowship Program at Fordham School of Law, led by Mr. Bernard Daras, to whom we also extend our sincere thanks. Now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Professor Janelle Wilson. Professor Wilson brings a wealth of expertise of the intersection of labor law and sports industry. She's a professor at law at Fordham University in New York, where she has been teaching since 2007, shaping the next generation of legal minds. Beyond the classroom, she serves as a labor relations counsel for the National Football League. In this role, she represents the NFL and its member clubs in complex labor management disputes, including litigation and arbitrations. Her career is marked by a commitment to integrity and justice, having previously served as a senior labor attorney for the New York City Transit Authority and as an assistant district attorney in the Bronx. Professor Wilson is also the founder of the G.U.L. Wilson Foundation, dedicated to supporting minority students in higher educations, and serves on the board of governors for the Partnership for Clean Competitions. Today, she will share her insights on a theme that is vital to us all, discipline as a virtue, discipline as a sanction, labor relations, and the integrity of professional sports. Professor Winston, thank you for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Alexander. I appreciate the intro. I'd like to first thank the Superior Court of Sports Justice for Football and the National School of Sports Justice for giving me the opportunity to participate in this lecture series. I am a professor at Fordham, but I'm also a very proud Fordham alum. I went to law school at Fordham as well, so I know their program very well. And I know that they have great fellows. So it was a pleasure to meet and work with Alexander. I am used to teaching a skills-based course at Fordham, so I really enjoy interactive classes. So feel free to chime in and let's have a conversation whenever you feel ready or invested in a topic. I'm happy to have the feedback, happy to have conversations. I think it keeps it lively and interesting, not just me droning on for an hour about labor relations and integrity, but I can if I need to. So for any students who are in the audience, I always start, anytime I do a lecture, I always start with explaining that sports is an industry and not a practice of law. I'm a labor attorney. I happen to work in sports. So I make that point because I believe that one's practice informs how an attorney approaches the integrity of the game. I joined the National Football League in 2016. as Alex mentioned. And before working in sports, I worked in transportation doing labor relations, and that was my first foray into labor relations. But I began my career as a prosecutor in the Bronx, and I worked in child abuse and sex crimes. And when I started my job in the Bronx, the then district attorney, Robert Johnson, told all of us young prosecutors that we had one job, and that one job was to do justice. And sometimes justice meant dismissing a case, and sometimes justice meant someone was going to jail for a very long time. But it was our job to look at it and figure out what justice meant. And that's stayed with me for the entirety of my career. And I began my career as a prosecutor in 2004. So that's 22 years ago at this point. And I still take that approach. And I take that approach when I am administering our drug program and my approach to anti-doping and protecting the integrity of professional sports. So I like to think of myself as being firm but fair. I'm very far from a pushover, but I definitely want to make sure that I'm being fair to the person on the other side of the table. So the premise of today's discussion is that success in sports requires discipline. Discipline as a virtue, meaning commitment, training, and professionalism, and discipline as a punishment for misconduct. Discipline as a virtue is not just about working hard. It's about consistency in doing the right things, even when it's difficult or it isn't glamorous. So professional athletes, their commitment to their craft is unmatched. And I think we all know that being in this industry. It is that commitment that keeps them aligned with their long-term goals despite setbacks like injuries, losses, or public pressure. The one thing that we know for sure is that professional athletes are training constantly. They're relentless. And I think that they take that sort of work product onto the field with them. So as a virtue, discipline is the foundation that turns talent into sustained excellence. And without it, even the most gifted athlete will struggle to reach or stay at the top. And with discipline, athletes can maximize their potential, maintain peak performance, and build lasting careers. And when people think of professional athletes, this is the kind of discipline that I think most people picture. But what about those of us who are tasked with using discipline to protect the integrity of the game? That's what I want to talk about today. So labor relations serves as a microcosm of the real world, and you'll see those same sort of societal struggles for power, for fairness, for resources, all in your work in labor relations. However, professional sports are an unusual labor market. This is not the typical labor market. You have millionaire employees and billionaire club owners or employers negotiating rules designed not only to govern the workers, but to preserve the credibility of the entire enterprise. In my case, it's professional football. Not what we call soccer, but American football, where you barely use your feet. So the other major sports leagues deal with managing this same market. If you take millionaires and billionaires and set that aside, I approach the discipline of a professional athlete in the same way that I approach the discipline of a unionized worker at New York City Transit. So how much power should the leagues have to discipline players? Let's start at the beginning. I think professional sports leagues function as a very sophisticated law system, and it's best described as collectively bargained workplaces. For those who are interested in sports, for me, there are four core components that define that structure of the collectively bargained workplace. The first being collective bargaining agreements, or CBAs. And I think most people have an idea of the major sports leagues and their CBAs and some of the components that go into that CBA. We also have the players' unions, our arbitration system, which most world leagues use some form of arbitration or alternative dispute resolution. And then finally, commissioner authority. That's our collectively bargained workplace. And so we're going to go through some of those things and talk about how it impacts the integrity of the game and how discipline is a tool for all of those components to make sure that we protect the industry and protect our specific sports. So the collective bargaining agreement, and I'm speaking specifically to agreements and structures here in the United States. A collective bargaining agreement, or CBA, is a formal contract between one or more employers and a group of employees represented by a union, and it establishes the terms and conditions of employment. So in leagues like the NFL, this dynamic is particularly complex because we have 32 separate companies operating as employers, and they're negotiating with this unionized workforce. So from the league office perspective, which is inherently managerial, it's important to recognize that authority, especially in areas like discipline, because it's not unilateral. And instead, it's shaped and it's constrained by negotiation. So disciplinary policies, similar to salaries and working conditions, are the product of the bargaining process. So those CBAs have both advantages and disadvantages or challenges. And collective bargaining typically results in a stronger compensation, stronger benefits, and procedural protections for players. However, the uniformity of those agreements can limit individual flexibility, leaving some players to feel like, or some athletes to feel that their unique circumstances are not being fully addressed. And that's the fundamental tension in labor law. How do you balance employer control with employee rights? And most leagues require that centralized authority to maintain competitive integrity and operational efficiency. And while players seek fairness and autonomy and protection, it's sometimes difficult to reconcile those needs in modern professional sports as a legal system. So personally, I enjoy reminding the union of this concept when they challenge the severity of a sanction. And my first statement is always, you bargained for this. You know, this is the product of negotiation. This is the product of collective bargaining. So before you yell and scream about this sanction too much, you know, you're a participant here. And when it's the employee or the athlete, then it becomes your union agreed to this. And we can talk about what that looks like when we need to bend a little, but generally speaking, for us, our discipline is very highly prescribed and we don't deviate from it too much. And I think that that's important when we talk about protecting the integrity of the game and the overall success of the leagues. But let's talk a little bit more about the player unions for a moment. The player unions or player associations are organizations that represent athletes in professional sports leagues. And well-known examples include the National Football League Players Association, the National Basketball Players Association. They negotiate with leagues on behalf of players to protect players' rights. Some might assume that since I've always worked on the managerial side of labor law, that I would be anti-union, but that would be incorrect. I think that unions serve a very vital role in the collective bargaining ecosystem. At the same time, it's important to recognize that unions are not without limitations. Within the United States, the dynamics between the players' union and the leagues, such as the NBA and the NFL, it varies considerably. And those differences are shaped by their different economic structures, their different bargaining history, their different governance models, and the tension between leagues and union is not merely theoretical. That tension has a practical consequence. Even when negotiations are conducted by a relatively small group of representatives, The outcomes affect a much broader set of stakeholders. That includes the players and the owners who generally are not participating in the negotiation process. And that negotiation process, contrary to what the general public understands, takes place over a number of years. For example, our current CBA at the NFL doesn't expire until 2030, but we are already working on our collective bargaining and what we want to ask for in this next CBA. So this takes place over years. These negotiations take a long time. Those tensions come and go, and these are ongoing negotiations that really are shaped by the history of the two organizations that are interacting with one another. So we want to keep that in mind. Whether or not there are changes in conditions, when negotiating, discipline is always on the table, which brings us to arbitration. Leagues often use arbitration to review or impose discipline. The NFL has a private panel of arbitrators that we use that is selected by both us and the Players Association that will hear any discipline that we bring forward. We don't go into any international tribunals. We have private arbitration, and that is for us to protect reputation, protect proprietary information about our league, and to keep it as close to vest as possible. So arbitration tends to be much faster. And what we really like is that the arbitrators develop a sort of subject matter expertise, and the parties can maintain confidentiality, as I just said briefly before. That said, arbitration is also the subject of significant public critique. People often question the neutrality of these arbitrators, and the players have limited appeal rights when you use arbitration, and there's less transparency than a public court decision, which would be released to the public. Especially the argument about the arbitrators who are hired by the parties. There are objections from players who think that the arbitrators are serving at the pleasure of the league office itself, or that these arbitrators are somehow conspiring with the union that's supposed to be representing them, and will often hire outside counsel or additional representation to represent them in their arbitration. Despite our assurances that these are third-party arbitrators who are there simply to read our CBA, which is, our universe of law, to read our CBA and to read our various conduct policies and decide if the player has run afoul of one of our rules. Which leads me to commissioner authority. If there's something that people hate more than these arbitration panels, it's commissioner authority. And the one thing I love about sports, and I am a fan, which is how I wound up working in sports. I love sports. Sports fans are passionate, and depending on the league and the commissioner, you can get some very strong views surrounding the ideas of commissioner authority. The trade-off is efficiency and control versus transparency and fairness. We have coming up very soon our draft for 2026. And if you know anything about the NFL draft, people tune in just to see other fans boo our commissioner, and he is booed often and usually for the entire 3 days that we are picking our rookie class. So depending on, where you stand, you may have some strong feelings about commissioner authority. However, strong commissioner authorities helps leagues act fast and helps leagues protect their image. And that's an important point about the sports industry and the key to success in the sports industry. However, if the commissioner's authority seems unchecked by the general public, if it seems unchecked, it can undermine the trust amongst players and fans. So commissioners can take decisive action to protect the brand, but that also comes with critique from the people who may feel as if they were wronged on the other side of that decision. But that ability to take decisive action is important, especially when we talk about high-profile incidents. And when you have high-profile incidents involving violence or gambling or performance-enhancing substances, acting fast signals accountability to the fans and to sponsors. You always got to think about the sponsors. That's always there. It signals that we're taking accountability very quickly. But what happens when the commissioner punishes behavior not clearly defined in the rules? There's some tension there when people don't see that bright line rule that the commissioner is now punishing. You're going to get pushback, you're going to get grievances, you're going to get public attention, all because people want to know that they know the rules. Everyone wants to be on the inside. Everyone wants to know every step of the way what's happening and why it's happening. So strong commissioner authority can clash with player unions and result in disputes like a strike. And a strike isn't good for anybody's league. Oop, I apologize. My phone is ringing. Where was I? So if we want to give you an example. Sorry, it could lead to grievances or strikes and be costly both financially and reputation-wise. And that's what I want to get into, reputation. Because a lot of what we're talking about here, when we talk about success, we're talking about brand management, right? Because that brand management, what you're doing out in the market is how we tell whether or not you're at the top when we talk about sports leagues and who's watching and who's getting the sponsorships, who's buying commercials. That's going to be a key indicator of your brand management. And so having very high profile misconduct that the commissioner has to address and dealing with it quickly is going to do a lot to help with that labor governance. So one question that I pose to students when I have these conversations is, should a star athlete be treated differently because their actions directly affect the product? When someone is the face of your brand, when someone is the face of your industry, what happens when they're in trouble, when they are engaging in misconduct? Should they be treated differently? So let's talk about discipline as an economic matter, and the economics of sports depends on credibility and fairness, right? Do we have the credibility to ask for what we're asking for? Is there a outward public fairness that fans can rely on? I think that's a significant question. So as someone who is responsible for educating players, coaches, owners, I educate all of them about league-wide policies. Here are some of the threats that I personally address when I go club to club to talk to them about our league-wide policies. I work in anti-doping, so I always mention performance-enhancing substances first. Doping is cheating, plain and simple. So when we talk about integrity of the game, protecting our brand management, anti-doping has to be at the top of your priorities, because what trust can any fan, any broadcast network, any sponsor have if there is this perception that the athletes in your league are cheating? We have the Olympics coming up in 28. I become very patriotic when we have the Olympics, and I accuse everybody of cheating. Everybody's cheating when I watch the Olympics. And so there's something to it, though, when you say that about someone cheating or doing something they shouldn't be doing, because it decreases the confidence in the product, right? Everybody wants to see a good match. Everyone wants to see competition in its pure form. And if there's this idea that people are cheating, it takes away from the fun and the quality of the product that we're putting out. So anti-doping, so important. We lecture our athletes on anti-doping endlessly. As soon as they come in as rookies, that is one of the first things we talk to them about is anti-doping. One of the issues that every league in the US is facing is gambling. And with the rise of legalized gambling, it's a major concern. And gambling is not limited to just going in and betting in a casino. We're talking about game manipulation. We talk about sharing information, inside information. And when we discuss this with players, we have to get into every aspect of that. If it's not your job to give out information about your club, you don't give out information about your club. If it's not your job to say who's injured and who's not, you don't tell people who's injured and who's not. But those things, again, speak to the integrity of the game. And if you violate that, if you engage in that, what should be the punishment? We also talk about dangerous play. Are you doing something while you're playing that's dangerous, that can harm someone, that will impact the outcome? Those on-field violations, again, undermine the credibility of our product. And we want to take steps to make sure that we protect that product as we move forward. And then finally, we talk to them about off-field misconduct affecting the league's reputation. Again, we get back to that idea of brand management. So when I go from club to club to teach the rookies about our labor policies, I always pose the question to them. If the commissioner has to choose between you and the shield, what do you think he'll choose? And we use the shield because that's in our logo. We use the shield as a method of saying the league. So if the commissioner has to choose between you and the shield, who's he going to choose? And they always get it right. He's going to choose the shield every single time. And so when we think about misconduct off field, we're really talking about reputational harm. And we're trying to teach the athletes about reputational harm. And so discipline as a form of deterrence, when we talk about these different things, becomes so very important. Deterrence with anti-doping, deterrence with gambling, deterrence with off-field conduct. We want to make sure that they're aware, because at the core of the sports industry, and that's sports across the board, not just American football or football, soccer, it's the entire sports industry. The principle is that fans are purchasing the uncertainty of the outcome. That's what they're purchasing. Although everyone comes to every game or meet or whatever in all of their team regalia, all their team clothing, they're still purchasing that uncertainty of the outcome because maybe their team is the underdog. Maybe their team is the favorite. We should know the outcome before we get there. It takes away from the product. So taking care of those sort of competitive issues is very important. And the value of competition depends on that belief that the results are genuine and unscripted. And once the integrity is compromised, the credibility of the entire sport, and by extension, the entire industry, is at risk. So from a legal perspective, disciplinary systems in the professional sports arena functions as a form of sort of private regulation. And leagues establish and they enforce their own rules. So this makes discipline not just a matter of fairness and safety, but also a critical sort of mechanism for sustaining trust in the marketplace of sports. So let's take gambling, for example. As a league employee, I may not gamble when traveling for NFL business. If I violate that rule, the punishment is termination. For our players, Players may not gamble when they travel for NFL business. If they violate that rule, they are suspended. So the league has established and enforces its rules, and in the same instance, the rules for players and non-player personnel are different. And while in the civilian world that may not fly, in our collectively bargain world, we can have these differences because these differences are established through negotiation. So we have different rules for that. So why are we regulating gambling? Well, if a league official or player were seen in a sports book just before a game, it would erode the public's trust in our product. We cannot maintain trust if we don't discipline for that violation. Within the context of labor relations, discipline is not purely a matter of moral enforcement. Are we sort of getting into the difference between right and wrong? Yes, but it's not purely a matter of moral enforcement. Rather, it's an ongoing negotiation between competing institutional interests. And that negotiation is shaped by each party's perspective and bargaining power. And generally, the conflicts arise between leagues and unions over the scope and the fairness of that discipline. You will often hear, and I often hear as someone who negotiates with the players union a lot, that discipline has gone too far, discipline was too public, discipline was too harsh. All of those things are already addressed in our policies and in our collective bargaining agreement. So some of it they're saying for show, but the reality is those conflicts come when they feel like that punishment is not meeting the offense at the appropriate level. Procedural fairness is also an issue at times, but for the most part, our procedures is so highly prescribed that we really don't deviate from what that procedure should be when it comes to discipline. But as you know, arbitration has become the primary mechanism for resolving these disputes. So when these disputes arise, they're really just a clash of priorities. It's a clash of priorities. The players want procedural protections like due process. They want neutral arbitration. They want clear standards. The league is prioritizing their ability to act decisively to protect the integrity of the game and to protect the brand. So when those priorities clash, we're going to go to that third party to try to move forward. Now, if we go back to the player who was in the sports book before the game, the commissioner is going to want the ability to immediately take that athlete off of the field. The union is going to want to make clear that there is a clear and consistent method of challenging that decision to remove that player from the field. And that those are the clashing priorities. The ability to remove, what do we do if the athlete is removed? So in labor relations, these ongoing struggles are really just negotiations over power, fairness, and resources. Like I mentioned earlier, similar to regular everyday life, people want to know that you're being fair. They want to know that they have some power and that the power dynamic isn't so unbalanced that they are getting, the short end of the stick, so to speak. So these negotiations are necessary to keep our athletes honest, to keep our fans engaged, and to keep the integrity of the game intact. That's something that we want to stay close to. As a practical example of protecting the integrity of professional sports, let's go back to performance enhancing substances. We call that, colloquially steroids. That's what it is, steroids, right? So in anti-doping, you have to grapple with strict liability versus fairness. So most sports leagues have a strict liability policy, and that includes the NFL. In the NFL, players are warned, you are responsible for what's in your body. On its face, it seems like an easy rule to enforce. And to some extent, it is. However, We also know that in professional sports, athletes frequently rely on supplements and nutrition products to recover. And an unfortunate truth is that many supplements are contaminated with banned substances. So in the NFL, our banned substance list is negotiated by the parties, meaning we decide together what substances are banned. We don't use the WADA list. There are plenty of leagues that use WADA. We don't. We make our own list depending on our labs and our experts to tell us which substances should be on that list. We also negotiate the penalty for testing positive for one of those banned substances. So in our universe, the parties are carving out each step of that disciplinary process for substances of abuse. The parties also provide education to the players and to the clubs about supplements. So why would the union challenge our discipline when a player tests positive following the use of a supplement? Well, the answer to that is easy: the player. We discussed earlier that one of the difficult things about collective bargaining is that you cannot account for every athlete's individual needs. So, how do you distinguish the player who uses a contaminated substance from the player who's actually doping? If I can't distinguish between the two, then everyone has to be treated like the cheater. You have to administer to the wrongdoer in anti-doping. So it is a strict liability policy because the player is responsible for what's in his body, but should discipline, I guess the question is, should discipline focus on the harm to the sport or the moral behaviors of the player? It's a difficult question to reconcile because can we ever really know the morals of the player, the athlete? Can the public ever have confidence in our sport if there's this perception that steroids are rampant? So does that force us as a league, as an industry, regardless of what sport you're in, does that force us to be very strict on our interpretation of the rules surrounding performance enhancing substances? Is, is any of this fair to the player using supplements simply trying to recover? Or were they sufficiently warned of the risks posed by supplements? How do we determine what's fair in these instances? And what's the impact on the product when we prioritize fairness to the player as opposed to integrity of the game? Our success as a league is contingent on protecting the integrity of the game. So how much do we focus on the player's intent versus the harm to the product? In the end, right, everyone benefits from a successful product, our game, right? Competition. The players, the owners, the league, the union, everybody's benefiting because everybody gets a piece of that final product. So that calculation, that use of discipline, that strict liability when it comes to performance enhancing substances is just another form of brand management. And if we're going to be a successful league, we're going to have to discipline, and we're going to have to discipline consistently. And like I said, feel free to jump in whenever you want to discuss. Up to you. Let's
So,
go
Professor
to
Janelle,
yes.
just a quick question. You guys have also life bans for anti-doping use from athletes. You said that you don't follow the World Organization. Do you have like you can ban for life athletes that
We do we do banishments, yes. We do banishments with a minimum amount of time that you have to be out. So if you use performance enhancing substances in our league twice, you are banned for 1 year. If you use it a third time, you are banned for a minimum of 2 years. It doesn't mean that you can come back after 2 years. It's going to depend on what you did and how you did it, but it's a minimum of 2 years that you have to be gone. Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Me, right here. Well, I am Jose Maria Filomeno. I am a member of the Brazilian Soccer Football Supreme Justice of Law. And I want to first of all thank all the organizers of this so important event to share information, knowledge. And thank you, Professor Jamil Winston Special for being here and to share with us all her knowledge and about such so important issues in sports regulation, discipline, and various other subjects. But since you work with labor rights, as you mentioned before, my question is in that area. I would like to know more specifically your views on the guarantees for female athletes in professional sports competitions. In common law, in Brazil and in many other countries, I imagine in the United States, the same as well, legislations guarantee rights for women, such as stability during pregnancy, paid leave during breastfeeding, and among others, such as the right for the same pay, the same salary as men when they perform in the same job and work. In professional football leagues, as we know, I don't know about other sports, as despite the substantial growth in audience and sponsorship, the reality is completely different. The difference between men and women pay is absurd, reaching 20, 30, 50, sometimes 100 times more. Is it possible to reverse this through negotiations and legislation?
I don't know that it's possible to reverse that through legislation and negotiation.
What can be done to make it closer?
Yeah. I think at least in the US, there has been a real push for allyship.
I don't know if there is you work for the NFL. I don't know if I know that there's a basketball, a women's league, and baseball, and the soccer, our football is very strong in the U.S.
Yes. Yeah. Well,
I haven't seen a women's football league competition.
No, they're starting a flag, but we don't have American Football League for women just yet. But I'll talk about football, soccer in the U.S. Because that has been a debate for many years in the U.S. The difference between the men's and the women's, and the joke has always been the women's team actually wins, and the men's team is not, and the women's team has consistently won gold, and they're getting a fraction of what the men are being paid. And the arguments around that center around economics. And that's why we talked about earlier the economic structure of these organizations. Where are they getting their money and how are they basing their salary, their pay? And so within that structure, if most of your money is coming from sponsorship and broadcast agreements, and those leagues don't have those sponsorship and broadcast agreements, here in the US, they depend on that to say, see, if the broadcasters wanted to pay for this, they would, and you would have a bigger pot of money to be able to split up. And so, since so much of sports revenue here is dependent on sponsorship and broadcasting agreements, you can't really force a broadcaster to pay for time during this women's sporting event. Um, if the government were to establish minimum pay, it'd probably be related to Olympic athletes in the US. That would be an easier thing for the government to regulate versus these private leagues of private companies.
Yeah.
I wish it were better. I was a basketball player in college, and I knew that I wasn't going to play professionally because they didn't make any money. I went to law school. I said, I got to go where the paycheck is.
Well, Fordham is not very traditional in basketball league. I
Yeah.
hope they're doing better now.
Well, they're doing a little bit better. And I think with the rise in popularity, especially of the WNBA here in the US, I think these female athletes are going to do a lot better in the coming years. And with the increase of younger girls getting into sports earlier and at a higher number, it will only grow. I don't know if it'll ever be equal, but it'll only grow, I think. Okay. So another example, if professional sports leagues are going to achieve sustained success, is to take a firm and a consistent approach to off-field conduct that damages the brand. So for us in the US, off-field conduct is one of the most scrutinized aspects of modern professional sports. And in an era defined by constant media exposure, every athlete effectively operates under continuous public observation, right? Everybody has their cell phone out at all times. So the reality of this consistent media exposure is every professional athlete carries not only their personal reputation, but also the brand and the integrity of their team and the league. So when professional athletes engage in off-field conduct that undermines the public confidence or harms the league's image, the issue transcends sort of that individual accountability and it becomes institutional, right? And so this raises a critical legal and ethical question. Can disciplinary mechanisms opposed by leagues effectively restore public trust after misconduct? Is that possible? Or is this sort of a show? Are we putting these things out there? Are we publicizing discipline? Are we doing all these things simply to appease the public? Particularly in cases where the conduct is deemed conduct detrimental, which is such a vague term that's often used as a catch-all, basically, as a catch-all for any behavior that's not desirable. So from a governance standpoint, discipline is serving multiple functions. We want to punish, we want deterrence, we want reputational repair. However, its success in rebuilding trust depends only on the severity and the consistency of the sanction. Are we consistent when we approach this? Every time we have a domestic violence incident, are we responding, and are we responding consistently? But also transparency and the perceived legitimacy of the process. Are you really having a hearing, or is the commissioner just punishing you? Is there an opportunity for you to give your side of the story, or is the commissioner just saying you're off the field or you're suspended? That sort of legitimacy of process will help build the public trust and ultimately protect the brand and the brand management. So disciplinary systems with professional sports operate not only as internal enforcement tools, but as instruments of brand management and public accountability within a highly visible industry. People love sports. People love going live to sporting events. People rewatch their favorite games. They rewatch their favorite plays. They're going on YouTube to see what happened during a game. This is a highly, highly visible industry, and we have to be careful about how the professional athletes that we have in this industry are responding to outside influences, whether that be engaging with the general public or simply just behaving on their own but getting into trouble. So the league's value is inextricably tied to the public perception. And when you factor in fan trust, corporate sponsorship, broadcasting relationships, and community engagement, they all depend on the integrity of the product being presented. So when the perception is compromised, inaction or inconsistency in discipline can be as damaging as the conduct itself. And I think we can all think of examples of when we think some particular league handled some athletes' off-field conduct in a poor manner. And I'll close by saying, we're getting close to time. I'll close by saying that, you know, discipline as a virtue, discipline as a commitment produces excellence. Discipline as a punishment preserves fairness. And therein lies that labor relations and the success of the league depends on discipline. So I want to thank you guys again, and I'm happy to take any additional questions if you have them.
Thank you, Professor Janelle, for your time and for the time for everybody that it's had the pleasure to listen to your lecture. I will just add a small question, if you can share. We are in the court, about 100 people working on discipline and the system in Brazil that does what you guys do over there. Can you share, like, if you are in your governing body, you are more than 100 or less than 100? How big are you guys settled to do this kind of training that you talk about today? About even with the anti-doping stuff, we don't do. We have another branch of judiciary system to punish the doping. And can you share how big are you guys on this matter?
Well, for labor relations, we are about 34 people. We're about 34 people for labor relations. My anti-doping team is just 3 of us who do all of the anti-doping for the league. But our legal department in general is probably maybe 50 people, but that's all legal. That's like real estate, that's transactions, contracts, that's all legal, not just labor relations. So we're not big. We're not big.
Thank you, Professor. Does anyone has any question for Professor Janelle before we close today?
Can I make one just quick question? All right, go ahead. Just it's one quick thing. It's just my name is João Marcos. You mentioned that you guys don't follow the WADA list, right? So what is the point? Is there any benefit of this disconnection but not following the WADA list? Is there any purpose that you guys have your own list?
Other than American arrogance, probably not. It's you know, the league likes to have tight control of what we're doing and how we're doing it. And a lot of our list matches WADA, but there are some substances that we've taken off. So really, we've shrank the list a little bit, but we always want to be sure that we are serving our population, our players, and the things that we're seeing. So if we don't see blood doping, then we may not focus our time on blood doping because it's just not prevalent in our league. Or another difference is right now we know that WADA is looking at GLP-1s to see if there are performance enhancing benefits to using a GLP-1. We simply don't agree. We don't think that that's something that we want to include. We don't think it has a performance enhancing effect, so we're not going to look into it. So if theoretically WADA put GLP-1s on their list, we're not putting it on ours. We just don't think it's relevant to our league. And for our players, there's a benefit of being huge, and they are huge. So they're not going to take a GLP-1 to try and slim down. Slimming down doesn't help them.
Thank you.
I have a question, Janelle. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Actually, 2 questions. It's just the NFL or NBA, NHL, MLB also has their own doping rules?
Have their own what?
doping rules, just like don't follow WADA.
Yes. Yes. So I'm also on the board for the Partnership for Clean Competition. And the Partnership for Clean Competition, if you're into anti-doping, we have a great conference. You should try. They usually have a link that you can watch it online. And in the PCC, we have most of the major sports leagues, and it's really the people who administer the drug programs. And we talk to each other, we talk about what things each league is prioritizing. I spend a lot of time talking to Major League Baseball because their program is probably the closest to ours. So we exchange a lot of information with Major League Baseball because we want to make sure we're staying ahead of the curve. You know, anytime someone is accused of cheating, there's always a new way to do it. And so trying to stay ahead of the curve, we want to know what they know, they want to know what we know, and we try to help each other. But all of the leagues have their own different policies, and they have their own different methods of enforcing it. I think that's highly personal to each league, and it's based on the priorities also of leadership and of the ownership groups. So it's going to always be unique in the way that they administer it. Some people are gobsmacked at the amount of times that we test people versus, what another league would test. So if we're doing thousands of tests and we only have 18 games, people are shocked. But for us, there is the importance of the perception, that we are combating anti-doping. And did you say you had a second question?
Yeah, my second question is based on what you said on the last part of your presentation. What's your opinion on what role does public opinion and this media pressure plays in shaping not just the disciplinary decisions, but also the disciplinary rules and what comes next?
I think it has some impact. I don't think it's the sole factor. I think there's more of an emphasis on how the public is going to respond when we come out with a new rule or we escalate or de-escalate our rules. There was quite a response publicly when we raised our threshold for marijuana. And when we decided to raise the threshold, it was because we wanted to focus on treatment for people who have a substance use disorder and not just punishing people for casually using marijuana. What people didn't know is the structure of our programs and the impact that it would have on the people who are already there. And so the public perception didn't really weigh in there because the public just doesn't know. They don't have all the facts. And we have no intention of giving them that information. So we wouldn't really base that decision on how the public will respond, but we're always prepared for the public to have a response. So we try to be as objective as possible and focus on the priorities of the two parties. What do we say? What does the union say? And are we able to back up the decision that we've made?
Thank you so much for your answers and for the presentation.
You're welcome.
Has anyone questions for Professor Janelle before we finish today? Now is the time. If no one has any question for Professor Janelle, I again thank everybody for this time and the presence of Professor Janelle. And I here declare that our lecture has ended. Everybody,
Thank you so much.
have a nice day.
Professor.
Nice to meet you.